Comic book superheroes can have a wide range of abilities. Cosmic powers, incredible technology, life-altering mutation. But sometimes, also, there's just a dinosaur. And in the right situations, that's just as awesome. Devil freaking Dinosaur got added to Marvel Rivals as of today, and he is perhaps the wildest character in the roster conceptually. Sure, we've had animals in the game since launch with Jeff the Landshark, but Devil is huge. And the general concept of being able to play a T-Rex in a hero shooter is incredible. As is tradition on the channel, whenever Rivals adds a relatively obscure character to the game, I'm gonna do a deep dive on their comics history. And while Devil is a little bit more well known than some others, he's been in multiple animated shows, he's just so fun that I absolutely had to do the launch day video. This one is going to be a little bit different than usual in some ways though, because Devil is a very different character. Typically in one of these I have a lot to say. For characters like Elsa Bloodstone, Angela, even White Fox with her fewer appearances, they have a lot of lore. Meanwhile, Devil Dinosaur... Well, let me put it like this. If I wanted to summarize Devil Dinosaur's lore as easily as I can, I would say this. Devil Dinosaur is a dinosaur from Dinosaur World. So that should give you an idea of the level we're going to be operating on for a lot of this. I do, of course, have things to say about Devil, as you can tell by the runtime of this video, but Devil Dinosaur rarely stars in his own comics. He is an animal, a pet, a companion, usually defined by the people he's partnered up with. So while this video is called Devil Dinosaur for Marvel Rivals recognizability purposes, really it's about Devil Dinosaur and friends. So without further ado, let's talk about a cool dinosaur. No better way to set Devil up than that. Devil Dinosaur first appeared in a self-titled series from 1978. And yes, I know I literally just said that he rarely stars in his own comics, but let me explain, it will make sense. The name and cover of this book focus mostly on Devil for marketing purposes, because the idea of a comic book starring a dinosaur does kind of rule. But even back at this early stage, Devil Dinosaur was always a duo character. You can see his buddy featured on the cover, though less prominently, and the first page of the comic makes their connection a lot more clear, just openly calling the series Devil Dinosaur and Moon Boy. As you could probably guess, Devil Dinosaur and Moon Boy is set in the past, long into Earth's prehistory. Kind of, we'll be coming back to that, but for now, just know that the book takes place during what I will vaguely call dinosaur times. Moon Boy is an evolutionary ancestor of humanity, a caveman essentially, and part of a tribe called the Small Folk. The small folk do not typically associate with dinosaurs. Moon Boy is unique in that way, but the first issue tells us the story of how he and Devil met for the first time. One night, the young and curious Moon Boy snuck out of his tribe's caves because he wanted to watch the eruption of a nearby volcano. But in the process, he ran across a group of other hominids belonging to a more aggressive tribe called the Killer Folk. The Killer Folk had captured a dinosaur known as a devil beast and her young, and were sacrificing them in a ritualistic attempt to appease a fire spirit and stop the volcanic eruption. Now, this is the Marvel Universe, so maybe in some places that would work, but this was not one of those places. The volcano kept going, and the area they were in was very quickly overwhelmed by fire. The Killer Folk fled, but one young devil beast survived. His skin turned red by the heat of the volcanic flames. Brief sidebar here. Yes, this comic does imply that Devil Dinosaur is red because his entire body is burned and scarred, though they would later retcon that and say he has some weird genetic variation that made him turn red when exposed to fire. Whatever, comic books are gonna be comic books. Moon Boy approached the injured creature, wanting to help him, but then the two were attacked by another dinosaur wanting to seize the opportunity for some easy prey. In that moment, though, Devil rallied, grabbed their attacker by the arm, and just kind of full force chunked it off a nearby cliff, exhausting himself in the process, but then Moon Boy helped nurse him back to health, and since they had both saved each other's lives, they were bonded forever. Unfortunately, the rest of Moon Boy's tribe did not understand this bond, and when the duo approached, they scattered, never to be seen again. This led to Moon Boy and Devil growing even closer, as they now both only had each other, and now seeing each other as brothers, their adventure began. The first Devil Dinosaur comic only ran for 9 issues, and it is really straightforward. You know the entire concept already. It's a caveman and a dinosaur going on prehistoric wilderness adventures. There's not a lot of lore that I need to cover here, but there are a couple things I want to point out. First off, this comic was drawn by Jack Kirby, which isn't surprising on its own. Kirby was one of the pillars of Marvel's art department at the time, especially in frequent collaboration with Stan Lee. But more interesting, this book was also written by Kirby, which you would see on occasion, but nowhere near as often. Now, for those of you who are already very familiar with Kirby, or have just been looking very closely at every panel that I show you, you already have an idea of what this means. But for those who don't, let me explain a little bit to you about Jack Kirby's writing. Much of Jack Kirby's writing is about cosmic stuff. The man loved writing space magic, and he had a very specific voice that he would use when making it. Devil Dinosaur is not exactly space magic, so how did he change his writing style for this setting? Well, maybe I should just give you an example. I'm just gonna read you, word for word, the opening couple of pages of Devil Dinosaur issue 3. For context, the setup here is that Moon Boy and Devil have been awoken from their sleep by the sound of some large creature crashing through the forest. Take a second and get an expectation in your mind here. Caveman, dinosaur, they've been woken up and they're gonna go investigate. What might those lines of dialogue sound like? Here's what they actually are. How can one find sleep when the valley resounds with fearful screams? Listen, Devil, they grow louder and closer. Whoever is responsible for this is too bold to go unpunished. You've got to challenge him. Give chase, Devil. Let us run this sleep killer to his lair and teach him to hunt elsewhere. He must be larger than a thunderhorn. His footsteps fall like tremors in the earth. Nothing that roams this valley could have done this. We are pursuing an evil presence from the spirit world. This is a challenge which cannot be ignored, Devil. We may not fare this well should the enemy grow bold enough to strike again. And yet, to hunt a spirit foe is akin to trapping the wind. Never has one been known to be caught or slain in battle. It is said among my people, the small folk, that these phantoms can summon powers not given to creatures of flesh and blood. You and I have just seen one appear and vanish at will. Still, I can sense that he lingers among us. It may be his wish to stay here and claim this valley as his own domain. So, to return to my earlier question, how did Jack Kirby change his usual dialogue style for the prehistoric setting? He didn't at all. The entire comic keeps up this vibe. This style of writing is not just a Moon Boy thing, every character talks in the same way. Devil Dinosaur is full of cavemen giving Shakespearean-level monologues, and it kinda rules, actually. I will fully admit that the contrast between the setting and the dialogue is jarring when you first pick up the comic, but once you get used to it, it makes for a very fun read. There's a certain level of campiness to Devil Dinosaur that only Jack Kirby could have provided, and I do appreciate it. The book was also almost entirely separate from the Marvel Universe at large, though almost is the key word there. It was implied to be taking place in the past of the main universe, again, we'll be coming back to that later, and in the last issue of the comic, Devil does time travel to the present. The Devil Beast falls into an ill-defined time portal, pops out in 1978 Nevada, and then goes on a rampage for a couple of pages. Meanwhile, Moon Boy approaches a magic user simply named the Hag of the Pits, and with her sorcery, they are able to bring Devil back. This is not a major plot point, Devil doesn't run into any superheroes or anything here, but it did establish a connection to the wider Marvel Universe, which of course would get followed up later. The final page of the series ends with one of the best comic book panels I've ever seen. Jack Kirby, what a weird guy you were, and I mean that in the most complimentary way that I can. Despite the Chronicle ending, readers wouldn't have to wait too long for him to show up again, as Devil would reappear in a comic only a couple of months later so that he could fight Godzilla. Wait, huh? Yeah, Marvel and Godzilla cross over somewhat frequently. They've actually published new Marvel and Godzilla comics very recently, but their partnership began in the late 70s. A quick sidebar related to that, you'll have to forgive some lower resolution and saturation images for this part of the video. These early Godzilla comics are plagued with rights and licensing issues, so high quality images are not readily available online, but I'll do my best. Anyway, in issue 21 of Godzilla, the King of the Monsters has been captured by the Fantastic Four, who were able to shrink him down using PIM particles. This was only a temporary solution, however, the effect would eventually wear off, and so they need to decide what to do with him before he becomes a kaiju again. They're not going to simply exterminate him. The Fantastic Four are scientists, after all, so killing a unique creature isn't really their vibe. But what they do decide to do, perhaps even more questionably, is use a time machine stolen from Dr. Doom to just send Godzilla to the past where he can be with other dinosaurs or whatever. And if you're worried about the butterfly effect from that wild decision, don't be. Dr. Doom's time platform is explicitly, canonically, paradox-free time travel. How exactly does that work? It's never been explained because it's a Dr. Doom signature thing, and the technology behind it is just too advanced for regular people to comprehend. Which is a cop-out excuse, but one that's funny, so I'll take it. With the timeline problems just sort of hand-waved away, Godzilla is sent to the past, where he quickly runs into Devil Dinosaur and Moon Boy and gets into a fight. Godzilla is still under the effect of the PIM particles at this point, and Devil has been shown to have a mild resistance to heat and fire-based attacks, so it is a relatively even battle. Fitting this, it doesn't end with either monster taking the win, as during the conflict, all of them are attacked by another tribe of cavemen named the Lizard Folk, and in a Godzilla trope that we still see even to this day, the King of the Monsters teams up with his former enemy. Yes, this means that Devil Dinosaur has canonically fought alongside Godzilla. Or at least, sort of canonically, the canon status of these original Godzilla books is a can of worms that I do not have a good answer for, but I'm just gonna say canonically because it's awesome, and that is the point at the end of the day. At the end of the 2-issue arc, Godzilla returns to the present, something about the radiation from his body interfering with the time machine and pulling him back. It's not a very major storyline, but if I was gonna do a video on Devil Dinosaur, I absolutely had to mention this. Moving on in the chronology, the next comic to address actually doesn't feature Devil or Moon Boy at all. This is an issue of Marvel 2-in-1 starring The Thing and Quasar, and the reason I have to talk about it is, you know how I've been saying that Devil is kind of in the past timeline of Earth? Now I'm going to explain what I mean by that. In this comic, the heroes are time displaced to a prehistoric world by Roxxon tech, but then it's shortly revealed that this area is not the actual past of Earth, and instead an alternate reality. This was before the really big multiverse boom in superhero comics, so the word multiverse is never explicitly said. But funny enough, they do explicitly define it: universes which exist side by side with our own, possessing many of the same attributes and physical characteristics. Even though Devil Dinosaur and Moon Boy are not present in this comic, it would later be confirmed that this region was their world as well, and it would be given the number designation Earth 78411 and the name designation Dinosaur World. Yeah, in the intro, I really wasn't kidding. Dinosaur World is an official name from Marvel sources. At this point, following my usual character deep dive formula, we've reached a great point at which I can pause the history and talk about the character in question's powers. This will not be difficult today. Devil Dinosaur's powers include dinosaurness, dinosaurocity, the quality of being he's a dinosaur. He's a dinosaur. That's like 90% of it. Look, in a world of mostly humanoid heroes and villains, being a dinosaur is often enough to be interesting. He doesn't really need much else. Devil Dinosaur has no physical superpowers other than his simple physical form. He can breathe fire or something similar in a few different adaptations, most notably for this video, Marvel Rivals, but this is more to add variety to his in-game kit than anything else. In the comics, he cannot do this, and actually, I'd be willing to bet quite a bit that the reason he has a beam attack that looks like this in Rivals was inspired by the fact that he fought Godzilla. Devil does have one feature that notably sets him apart from other members of his kind, though, which is his intelligence. Devil is remarkably smart for a prehistoric reptile, usually ascribed to some sort of mutation, sometimes the same mutation that turned his skin red. Occasionally, Marvel handbooks have described Devil as being as intelligent as a human, but I wouldn't bank on that because it's not consistent with how he's written in actual stories. Devil is capable of using simple tools, he can think and plan ahead, and he can learn basic human communication, though he cannot speak himself. So on the whole, I would compare his level of intelligence to like a chimpanzee or similar ape. And that's literally all I have to say about Devil Dinosaur's powers. There's not a lot to it, which is completely fine. As I said, he doesn't need it. But while I'm here, there is a kind of adjacent concept to his powers that I might as well address, one that some paleontology nerds watching have been wondering this entire time. What kind of dinosaur is Devil, like, specifically? Very surprisingly, there is a definitive answer to this question, though whether you think it's a satisfying answer or not is gonna depend on you individually, because there is a bit of comic book nonsense in play. Devil's species is named in his original series, though only by the primitive Moon Boy, so he doesn't have a scientific classification. His kind is only ever referred to as the Devil Beasts. Later comics would expand on this, having characters who are smart enough to know paleontology refer to Devil directly as a Tyrannosaurus Rex. So that is the short answer, but Marvel also uses two loopholes for this classification. Devil Dinosaur is, after all, not from the main Earth. He is from Dinosaur World, and while the evolutionary path of that reality seems fairly similar to the main one, it might not be exactly the same. So he's an alternate universe dinosaur, which explains any slight genetic variation. It seems weirdly comparable to, like, dog breeds. Devil is a T-Rex, he's just a different kind of T-Rex. This doubles down with the other loophole, which is that Devil is also a mutant. Not necessarily mutant in the X-Men sense, that's kind of a different thing, but regardless, Devil is different even from other members of his species. So what is Devil Dinosaur? He's a Tyrannosaurus Rex with disclaimers, essentially. Some more recent interpretations of the character, like the Rivals one, have also given him horns, which makes him look more like a different dinosaur species, but this is purely an aesthetic choice to make him look more comic booky and also match the Devil name more. There's not biology behind it. Returning to the character history, and speaking of things that are also just done because they are fun and cool, see also every appearance of Devil Dinosaur for the next 36 years. Yeah, neither Devil Dinosaur nor Moon Boy would be main characters for quite some time after their first comic, but they would appear a lot, usually as gimmicks. The pair could show up at random pretty much anywhere at any time. Spider-Man, Avengers, Wolverine, Ghost Rider, even a very non-canon Beavis and Butthead crossover of all things. These rarely have anything near vital lore, they only happen so that superheroes can team up with a dinosaur, which I'm in full support of. Sometimes the heroes will get sent to Dinosaur World, other times Moon Boy and Devil will come to them, it really just depends on what the writer wants to do. There are two books in which they are closer to main characters, the first being Fallen Angels, a very strange X-Men spin-off where a chance encounter with a teleporter leads to Moon Boy and Devil just straight up joining the team for 5 issues. Then in 2011, they would be secondary characters in the limited series Scar, Lord of the Savage Land, which starred the son of Hulk going on adventures in the prehistoric sanctuary hidden in Marvel's Antarctica. And while I'm talking about the Savage Land, no, Devil weirdly doesn't have any lasting association with it. Usually any dinosaur-related storyline in Marvel is going to trace back to the Savage Land, but Devil is not from there. He will go there on occasion, but he is from Dinosaur World. And while I'm talking about Dinosaur World again, Devil is not the only character or concept related to it. He's very close. There's really only one other Marvel thing that traces back to Dinosaur World, but it is also worth quickly mentioning in this video. The hugely underrated superhero Reptile gets his dinosaur shape-shifting abilities from a magical amulet, and that amulet was created by the Hag of the Pits from Dinosaur World in the original Devil Dinosaur comics. How the amulet got from Dinosaur World to the main universe has never really been defined to my knowledge, but it is canonically from there. Given this, Reptile has of course teamed up with Moon Boy and Devil on a couple of occasions. Actually, that's what Reptile's first appearance comic is about. Now, we've almost reached a major turning point in Devil's history, and given the notable absence of one important name in the video so far, you can probably guess what that turning point is. But before we get there, there's just one more thing that I have to mention, mostly because multiple of my personal friends will be mad at me if I don't mention it. The absolutely off-the-wall, insane, pseudo-parody comic Next Wave features Devil Dinosaur in its final issue as a main villain. Now, the canon status of Next Wave is, it's certainly something. Short version, this is not the main universe version of Devil, so it's not directly relevant to today's lore, but I need to bring it up because this version of Devil is hyper-intelligent, he's a criminal mastermind, and when we first see him on the page, he is wearing a smoking jacket, drinking champagne, and carrying a gun. Like I said, this is not the main universe version of Devil, but Marvel Rivals, if you're looking for more skin ideas for the character, allow me to direct you to Next Wave. With that obligation fulfilled, we skip ahead to 2015, where another character, this one being currently the most important to Devil's lore, finally enters the picture. Here's where we meet Moon Girl. Now, I like Moon Girl, let me make that clear right up front. I think she's a great character. That said, summarizing her earliest comics is a difficult task, and that's not Moon Girl's fault. I know exactly whose fault it is. It's the fault of a real-world man named Ike Perlmutter. I'll do my best to explain that succinctly, but to start, Moon Girl's real name is Lunella Lafayette. When she's introduced, she is 9 years old, and yet she is incredibly intelligent, on par with Marvel's adult super scientists like Hank Pym and Reed Richards. In her original series, Lunella was actually stated to be the smartest person on Earth, balanced out by the fact that, you know, she is still a child. I don't know if she still has the top slot in current canon. Marvel doesn't exactly update their intelligence rankings very often, but I feel comfortable saying that she's still top 5 at least. That all seems fairly normal, par for the course for comic characters, especially ones targeted at younger readers. But Lunella is also a thing called an Inhuman. And if you've been on my channel for a bit, you know exactly why this complicates matters. Speedrun time. The Inhumans have been a thing in Marvel for decades, first debuting in the 60s, though they were never particularly popular. They did have something of a cult following though, which persisted more or less until the 2010s. Then, in the mid-2010s, their status quo changed, thanks to the order of then CEO of Marvel, Ike Perlmutter, who is just a real scumbag meat sack of a man. Perlmutter, motivated by both bitterness about Marvel not having the movie rights to the X-Men and a not insubstantial amount of racism, tried to essentially take all of Marvel's X-Men and mutant characters, erase them from the comics, and replace them with the Inhumans, thinking that fans would just be totally cool with these decades-old characters being replaced by the ones that Perlmutter preferred. In his mind, evidently, this was fine because the Inhumans are also an offshoot branch of humanity who get powers from their genetic code, so they should be completely replaceable with the X-Men. Fans disagreed, but that did not stop anybody. This company-wide initiative led to Inhumans and Inhuman storylines getting forced into every corner of the Marvel Universe, whether it made a lot of sense or not. It sucked at a company level, but a lot of Marvel creators worked with what they had, and I will say, as much as this Inhumans push was horrible in general, it did give us a bunch of good individual characters like Moon Girl. Again, none of my bitterness towards this Inhumans push extends towards Moon Girl. She's a great character made in a bad situation. Last point of lore here, Inhuman genetics are latent. They had been interspersed into human DNA sequences a very long time ago, and any random person could have secret Inhuman genetic code and not even know about it. Then, if that person was exposed to a certain chemical called Terrigen, they would undergo a radical random transformation, sometimes giving them superpowers, but also sometimes turning them into a monster. This is going to be very important to Lunella's origin, so just keep that in your head. Now that was an extremely quick and simplified summary of the Inhumans and all the wild things that happened with them. It is a really interesting story, so if you would like to hear more about it, I've already done a full deep dive on this channel. And that deep dive is about 2 hours and 15 minutes long, which should give you an idea of how crazy it is. But for today's purposes, and for the storyline of Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur, you know all the details on the Inhumans that you need to, so we can move on, and if you want more later, it's available. So Lunella Lafayette is an Inhuman. We learn that about her in her first issue. She has not, however, been exposed to the transformative Terrigen yet. She is, for all intents and purposes, still human, but she's also smart enough to have analyzed her own genetic code and found the Inhuman sequences. Why did she think to do something like that, you might be wondering? Well, at the time, thanks to the weird Inhumans push, there was a cloud of Terrigen gas sweeping across the planet and transforming any unlucky Inhumans who happened to be caught in its path, whether they wanted the change or not. Lunella was understandably terrified about what this might bring for her, so she started looking for ways to become immune to the Terrigen's effects. She is smart enough to figure this sort of thing out, but she's also 9 years old and doesn't exactly have resources for that kind of superhero science. To fix that problem, she began sneaking out at night and looking for alien technology in the remnants of superhero battles. Eventually, this paid off, and Lunella came into possession of something called a Kree Omniwave projector, a very powerful energy source, but one that distorts time and space somewhat unpredictably. Meanwhile, on Dinosaur World, Moon Boy and Devil had also discovered an Omniwave projector, presumably deposited in the reality on one of the other multiverse-jumping adventures. They didn't know what it was, of course. They thought it was some sort of magical relic, which they referred to as the Night Stone. They did know that the Night Stone was powerful and dangerous, at least, so the duo managed to steal it from the killer folk who were using it as a weapon in their hunts. And unfortunately, at the same time, in the main Marvel universe, Lunella's device was activated, accidentally, by one of her teachers who was being a jerk. Thinking that the thing is just a toy that the girl was not supposed to have, the dude snatches it from her and starts spinning it on his finger, which opens a portal to another dimension, and then a bunch of cavemen and a dinosaur burst through. Now, the reason that everybody from Dinosaur World ran through this portal immediately is actually kind of a wild one. The synchronization of the two Omniwave projectors caused Moon Boys to disappear, and wanting to get what they saw as their sacred relic back, the killer folk ran through the portal, thinking that they could find it on the other side. But not before they killed Moon Boy? Like, straight up, Moon Boy dies in Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur issue 1. He does get revived later, but he dies. They kill him in this kid's comic. Wanting to avenge the death of his only friend, Devil then stampedes into the main Marvel universe, causing the killer folk to book it immediately because, I mean, yeah, I would run too. And then once his prey has left, he notices that Lunella, this small child, is holding the very artifact that he was seeking. So he kind of just grabs her by the backpack, picks her up, and walks away. And that's the end of issue 1. In issue 2, Devil tries to take the projector from Lunella, but she tells him no, standing up to the large monster and sticking to her goal of avoiding the Terrigen transformation. At this point, Devil, who is intelligent enough to kind of understand her meaning, doesn't persist, because, as sad as it is, he doesn't really need the projector. He was just doing that to avenge his fallen friend. He has no personal connection to it. So now that this kid needs it more than he doesn't have much else to do with it. The dinosaur does immediately take a liking to Lunella, though, recognizing the same bold, curious spirit that Moon Boy had. And so when Lunella is almost immediately kidnapped by the killer folk, Devil comes to her aid, and then just kinda doesn't leave her side. From this moment on, Lunella has a pet T-Rex, whether she wants one or not. She's skeptical at first, but also she's a 9-year-old kid, so she comes around to the idea pretty quick. Of course, having a full-size T-Rex around does attract some superhero-y attention, and over the next couple of issues, Lunella begins developing some super tech gadgets that she can use if the situation gets hot. This culminates when Devil eventually gets captured by the authorities, and Lunella suits up fully as Moon Girl for the first time, donning a homemade costume, plenty of homemade gear, and taking the name Moon Girl from insults that girls in her class would use against her. Now, I do have a lot more to say about this series in this video, but I just want to preface that I'm not going to be going over all of it, mostly because it's quite long, especially by modern standards. The first Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur comic ran for 47 issues, just because it was pretty good and popular. I also will be blunt for a minute here. You will occasionally see criticism of this character and series online, and I do want to address that. I'm not saying that everybody has to love Moon Girl or that the character is absolutely perfect, but I do want to add the context that while this comic is fun for all ages, the target audience was 10-year-olds. So if you see criticism online, just take it in the sense that they are criticizing a book for kids. And if they are judging it too harshly or based on adult standards, they're weird for that. And because I know what a certain group of people are going to say in the comments responding to that, and I would like to gently correct them on their understanding of the comic book industry, yes, I am well aware that Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur did not sell well in single issues. But that was not the goal of the comic. This was a book targeted at kids, and that meant that a lot of the sales goals were about trade paperbacks and collected editions. Those sold like hotcakes. Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur was really popular collected. They flew off the shelves at school book fairs and things like that, and they did make the series an objective financial success for Marvel. So if you're using single issue metrics as your only measure of success, you are just kind of doing it wrong. Now that I've cleared up that misconception, let's get back to the comic itself and Lunella's Inhuman transformation, because yes, it did happen despite her best attempts to avoid it. In issue 6 of the series, Moon Girl recovers the Omniwave projector, which had been found and lost a few times at this point, but by now it's too late. The Terrigen cloud is descending on New York City, and she can no longer avoid the changes that are coming for her. Again, given that this is a comic for 10 to 12-year-olds, the metaphor the story is using should be quite obvious. Lunella has no option other than accepting the reality of puberty, Terrigen, but she comes out the other side of it completely fine. Not unchanged, there is one difference, but she is fine. Her physical form is the same, but Lunella Lafayette now has the ability to swap brains with Devil Dinosaur. Not animals, not dinosaurs, Devil specifically. This is what the next arc of the series is all about, as Lunella doesn't know how to control her new abilities yet, leaving Moon Girl, with all her intelligence, trapped in the body of Devil, who can't make much use of it, and Devil Dinosaur going on a confused rampage in Lunella's human body. Naturally, shenanigans ensue. As Moon Girl's arc progressed, she did develop more control over this power and can now do it at will, though she is still at risk of transferring into Devil unintentionally whenever she experiences any form of strong emotion. Again, the metaphor for young teenage life is quite clear. By the middle of the series, Moon Girl was a fully fledged superhero. A more cartoony one, sure, but she was doing all the same stuff. Team-ups, crossovers, etc. She does also have a team-up with Sleepwalker. Fans of my channel knew I was going to mention that for sure. If this doesn't prove that she was fully integrated into Marvel, I don't know what will. A team-up with Sleepwalker of all characters? That feels like it was done specifically for me, except it was done in the 2010s when I wasn't doing content yet. Lunella is usually paired up with Devil for her appearances, though not technically always. She does get some solo adventures. However, since this video is Devil and Friends for Rivals, I'm going to focus more on things where he is actively present. Even in his more recent appearances alongside Moon Girl, Devil's role is pretty much the same. He rarely, if ever, speaks, and when he does, it's usually because of some sort of strange circumstances. He is a sidekick, a companion. Girl and her dog stories, much like the original Moon Boy was a boy and his dog story. I should probably spend a couple minutes on the time he turned into a human boy, though, huh? That seems like something people might be interested in. In Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur issue 33, Lunella is attempting an experiment to better control her brain swapping situation. And she does something wrong, which has the side effect of turning Devil into a kid about her age. This situation does not alter his mental state or intelligence capacity at all, though, so he's basically just a feral child, and not wanting the very confused Devil to just be running around on his own, Lunella takes him to school, claiming that he's her cousin, Devin Dinosaur. This status quo only lasts for like an issue and a half before he changes back, but much like the Godzilla thing from earlier in the video, it's just one of those not lore relevant moments that I still absolutely had to mention. As I've said a couple of times at this point, the Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur series was a huge success for Marvel. They had their target audience and they reached it perfectly. It ended at issue 47, but by this time the characters were pretty well entrenched in the Marvel Universe. The cover of issue 47 already teases the animated series that would come shortly after. That show got 2 seasons and is also fantastic. I highly recommend it if you have kids or younger siblings that you want to get into Marvel and superhero stuff. It keeps up the same concept and tone as the original, at least generally, and it also brings really unique and fun visual aesthetics and animations. The biggest difference between the show and the comic is a hilarious one, at least to me specifically, and that is that the show completely abandons the idea that Lunella Lafayette is an Inhuman. Again, the concept is similar and there are similar arcs, but all Inhuman-specific lore is removed from the show entirely, because by the time the show released, Ike Garbage Pile Perlmutter had been ousted from the company, and the Inhumans push was very much over. Since the show's ending, both Moon Girl and Devil have kept up a very consistent presence in recent comics. There was another Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur miniseries which had 5 issues, Devil himself had a series of webcomics which were basically just cute little cartoony shorts, and most recently, Lunella and Devil have appeared in the Avengers Academy webcomic series. I maybe don't have to outright explain the concept of that comic because it's called Avengers Academy, but it does revolve around Moon Girl and a bunch of other young heroes going into a superhero training program run by the Avengers. It ended late last year and Moon Girl has not shown up since, but that's a relatively recent ending for comics, and I heavily assume with Moon Girl and Devil being in Rivals, she will get some comics appearance pretty soon. That's also a great transition to talking about the Rivals interpretation of the characters, which is usually how I end these videos on Rivals releases. This one has been a little bit controversial in a few regards, but I think having seen the new trailer, I like it. The main point of discussion has revolved around Lunella's inclusion in the Rivals kit. After all, Moon Girl and Devil Dinosaur have been a dual character for over a decade now. They are as entwined as Cloak and Dagger, I would say. Not with the exact same dynamic, Devil is more of a companion, as I've brought up a couple of times, but still, they are usually together, and when they are not together, that's usually the point of the storyline. So when Rivals began teasing Devil as just Devil, people were understandably skeptical, but now I've looked at all his release stuff in-game and can shed some more light on the situation. Because I'm recording the next couple minutes of this video, 4 AM the day of release. Netties, you're killing me with these character drops, but let it never be said that Sir Superhero is not committed. You don't ever play as Lunella. Moon Girl never shows up on the battlefield, but that is, reasonable. How do I put this in YouTube content safe terms? There was no chance that they were ever going to let you play as a 10-year-old child in a video game that also has the Punisher, if you catch my drift. Moon Girl is present in the game though. Thank goodness they're not just ignoring her. She's right on the loading screen for the season, she's in some in-game event stuff, and she is present in Devil's kit, if not physically. Some of Devil's abilities come from gadgets that Moon Girl made for him. His little shield bubble power comes from a device on his collar, and it also has little sparkles and stars on it, so it's very clear where this gadget came from. Very cute. More importantly, this device also has some sort of microphone in it, allowing Moon Girl to call in from outside the battlefield and provide some of Devil's voice lines. She does his ultimate call out and a couple other things. This is a great idea to have her included without literally being there. Though I will say, I feel like it's a little bit underused. I thought Moon Girl was doing his spawn room character interactions and things like that, but she doesn't. I do wish there were a couple more Moon Girl lines in the game. I am generally fine with how Moon Girl is included, though. Her not being a technically playable character is probably the right call, but they definitely should put her in Devil's MVP screens and emotes and such, kind of like they do with Penny Parker outside of her mech. And I will entirely admit, her first story beat in the game is odd. Adding a young child to the game, especially a young black child, and having her first story arc be getting thrown in super jail by super cops, that's a choice. Definitely not the choice that I would have made, but I will say the first in-game event of the season does have Moon Girl hacking Alchemax's systems from within, like, immediately, so hopefully they're going somewhere good with that, despite the incredibly odd beginning. Anyway, Lunella's Rivals appearance aside, let's talk about Devil specifically, though very briefly, because I don't have a lot to say. His powers are dinosaurness, Dinosaurocity, the quality of being a dinosaur. He stomps, he bites, and he does have a Godzilla beam, which I kind of already addressed, but that's just there for fun. I personally, as someone who plays tank in the game quite often, am very excited about Devil's inclusion. Like, even if I didn't know who this character was, even if I knew nothing about Marvel, the opportunity to play a full-size T-Rex in a hero shooter, that's just so silly, Marvel Rivals. Good job! And on that note, I can loop this video back perfectly to the opening line. Superhero characters can have a wide range of abilities: cosmic power, incredible technology, life-altering mutation. But sometimes there's also just a dinosaur, and in the right situations, that is just as awesome as anything else. Thank you all so much for watching. As always, I do hope you enjoyed what was, like the White Fox video, another one that I had to blast out in like 3 days. Netties, I am begging you, please tell me the characters you're making in advance. I know you like my videos. You sponsored one of them. Just give me a little bit of a heads up. These weeks are rough. And since I had to crunch time this video, I think plugging my other platform is well deserved. I have a Patreon. If you go and check that out, you can find early and ad-free access to all of my content, as well as a Patreon exclusive video every month. There's over 7 hours of exclusives on there and counting. My username is the exact same over there as it is here. There's also a link in the description of this video and on my channel page. It's very easy to find. And extra double thank you to the people who already support me over there. It really does help me keep making these videos for you guys. Also, as always, shout out to Ruben Perez, the artist I work with for these videos. He's the one who drew the poses of the character that's been talking at you for the last 40 minutes or so. Go check out his other work if you have a chance. And as my final line, a call to action that has become regular in my Rivals videos at this point. Netties, guys, when you gonna add Sleepwalker into the game? You have a team-up possibility with him and Devil. They've interacted before. Add Sleepwalker to the game, Rivals. It's gonna happen eventually, and I will be here when it does. I'll be waiting, as long as it takes.